woman bled on his doorstep at midnight. "Don't fall yet, little saint," the man behind the silence said. "You came to my door. That makes you my problem now." Elena Marini had spent her life restoring torn pages and keeping her voice gentle in rooms that did not deserve it. She was the kind of woman who apologized when the world cut her open. In 2 minutes, the mafia boss's mistress would open the door and tell her he was already spoken for. In 2 hours, Elena would be hidden inside Lorenzo Vitelli's house while armed men searched the street below. She carried a damaged ledger page stitched inside her coat lining, and the names written under the water stains could either save Lorenzo's empire or burn it to the foundations. She did not know yet that the most dangerous thing in that house was not the mistress at the door. It was the quiet man in the dark room beyond her. And the way he looked at her after she said, with blood on his marble, sorry about the floor. The first sound I remembered clearly was not my own breathing. It was the dry, measured click of a ring striking crystal somewhere inside the house beyond the door. Once, then again, not impatient, not nervous, just controlled enough to make my skin go cold. I was standing under the lantern at the Vitelli house, with blood soaking the side of my dress, and my hand slipping against the brass lion's head knocker. The street behind me looked too clean for what had happened 3 blocks away. Rain had started in a fine mist, enough to silver the black car parked across the street. I did not know if the men inside it belonged to the people chasing me or the people I was about to beg from. I raised the knocker again. When the door opened, the woman in front of me was so beautiful it almost made me forget the pain. Dark hair in a sleek knot, silk robe the color of old champagne, bare feet on white marble. Her gaze moved over me slowly, from my wet hair to the blood on my sleeve to the hand pressed against my ribs. Then her mouth curved. "He's mine." If I had been less tired, maybe I would have laughed. Instead, I held the frame because the world was tipping sideways. "They followed me," I said. My voice sounded thin. "Lock the door." Her expression changed by 1 degree, nothing dramatic. Just enough to tell me I had said the only thing that mattered. Then I looked down and saw my blood on the threshold. "I'm sorry about your floor." For 1 suspended second, the woman stared at me as if she had not heard correctly. The ring clicked against crystal again somewhere deeper in the house. A man's voice came from the dark. "Bianca." He said only her name, but the whole house seemed to tighten around it. She stepped aside. "Get in before you die and ruin the marble completely." I crossed the threshold on shaking legs. The entry smelled like lemon oil, cold stone, and rain carried in on expensive wool. Somewhere farther inside, men were moving without speaking. That was worse than shouting would have been. Silence in a house like that meant everyone already knew where their hands belonged. Bianca shut the door. The lock slid heavy and final. He was waiting in the drawing room beyond the foyer, one hand resting against the edge of a cut-glass decanter. He wore a black suit without a tie, his shirt open at the throat, dark hair pushed back as if he had run a hand through it once and then stopped caring. The ring on his right hand, gold, square-faced, old-fashioned, caught the light before his eyes did. Lorenzo Vitelli looked like the kind of man architects imagined when they designed churches people confessed in. He looked at Bianca first. Then at the blood I had left in faint drops across the marble, then at me. I had expected anger, annoyance, calculation. What I had not expected was the stillness. He did not rush forward. He did not bark orders. He just watched me the way a man watches a lit match near dry curtains. "Who cut you?" he asked. I had practiced this in my head while running. Say Carlo's name. Say the ledger. Say the men from Mulberry Street. But standing in front of Lorenzo Vitelli, what came out was, "I'm trying not to faint." Bianca made a short sound that might have been a laugh. His eyes stayed on mine. That wasn't my question. It was the more immediate problem. A muscle moved in his jaw, nothing else. Then he crossed the room. I had seen men in authority before, priests, professors, donors at museum galas, but I had never seen a room reorganize itself around someone's body. Every armed man along the walls straightened. Bianca folded her arms and watched him with a familiarity that had nothing to do with softness. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I caught his scent under the rain. Clean cologne over something colder, night air, wet stone. The outside brought in and held under discipline. "Look at me," he said. I was already doing that. His fingers touched my wrist, not tender, not cruel, just exact. He checked the pulse there, then moved his hand to the soaked fabric at my side. I flinched before I could help it. He noticed. "So you do know fear," he murmured. "I know pain." That earned me something dangerous and almost invisible in his eyes. Bianca came near enough to inspect the wound. "Knife," she said. "Not deep enough to kill fast, either sloppy or interrupted." "I interrupted them," I said. Lorenzo glanced at me. "How?" I ran. For the first time, the corner of Bianca's mouth lifted for real. One of the men by the wall stepped forward. He was broad-shouldered, sandy-haired, with the patient face of someone who had seen too much and disliked being surprised. "Boss, street camera feed is already being pulled." Lorenzo did not take his eyes off me. "T.O., send 2 cars around the block and find out who sat outside long enough to think I wouldn't notice." Tia nodded and vanished. Bianca looked at my face again, more carefully this time. "Who sent you here?" "My brother." That changed the air. The ring clicked softly once against the decanter as Lorenzo's hand shifted. "Carlo Marini," he said. I swallowed. "You know him?" "I know everyone who touches my accounts. He told me if anything happened I should come here. He said if I used his name you would let me in. Your brother gives himself too much credit." Apparently. Blood was running warmer now, slipping beneath my palm. I hated that my knees were beginning to shake. Lorenzo noticed that too. He noticed everything. Bianca. She had already moved to the console table for a linen cloth. He caught my elbow before I tipped forward, steadying me with both hands. It should not have mattered the firmness of it, the restraint, but it did. He could have taken more space with me. He didn't. "Stay awake," he said. I wasn't planning a dramatic collapse. Good. I dislike theater in my house. Bianca pressed the folded cloth against my side and black spots burst across my vision. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood there too. "Ledger," I whispered. Lorenzo's gaze sharpened. "What ledger?" I forced my hand inside my coat lining, found the hidden slit Carlo had sewn there last month, and pulled out the damp, folded page wrapped in wax paper. Lorenzo took it without unfolding it. "Why bring this to me?" "Because men tried to kill me for it." My breath shook. "And because Carlo said if anyone in this city understood what was written there, it would be you." Bianca's eyes flicked to Lorenzo. Something unspoken passed between them. My legs went weaker. He saw it, stepped closer, and in a voice so low it barely crossed the space between us said, "Don't fall yet, little saint." I stared at him. "Why did you call me that?" "Because you're bleeding on my floor and apologizing for it." That should have made me angry. Instead, it lodged somewhere under my ribs beside the knife wound. He handed the folded page to Bianca without looking away from me. "Burn the cloth after the doctor sees her. Lock down the house. No one in or out." Then he bent, slid one arm behind my knees, the other around my back, and lifted me as if I weighed nothing at all. I should have protested. I should have told him I could walk. Instead, I caught the line of his throat at eye level and the hard beat of his pulse there. And for one shocking moment, the safest place in the city felt like the arms of a man half of New York feared. He carried me toward the stairs. Behind us, the door stood shut, the marble wiped clean except for one thin red crescent the servants had not reached yet. My old life did not come in with me. I woke to the smell of coffee, starch, and pain. The bedroom was too large to belong to anyone gentle. High ceiling crossed with dark beams. a crucifix on one wall, pale curtains moving in the morning breeze off a cracked-open window. My side burned under fresh bandaging every time I took a full breath, and for one humiliating second, I had no idea where I was. Then I heard a familiar, measured tap from the room beyond. Ring against porcelain this time, not crystal. Memory returned all at once. I pushed myself upright too quickly and had to stop when the wound pulled. Someone had traded my blood-stained dress for an oversized white shirt that smelled faintly of lavender soap. The sight of my own bare legs under a mafia boss's shirt should have unsettled me more than it did. Mostly I was too busy wondering whether Carlo was alive and whether the folded ledger page had survived the night. A woman with iron-gray hair and a face built for unimpressed mercy entered carrying a tray. "If you faint, do it onto the carpet," she said. "The marble in this house has suffered enough." I blinked. She set the tray down. "Teresa Morty, I run this place because the men in it would starve or shoot each other over butter without me." Despite myself, I smiled. "There," she said. A human expression. I was beginning to think Signor Vitelli had dragged in a saint's ghost. "Apparently I'm a little saint," Teresa snorted. "If he's already giving you names, you've made an impression." Before I could ask what that meant, a male voice floated from the hallway. "Teresa, if there is butter on my eggs again, I'm filing a complaint with God." "Then ask him yourself, Nico," she called back. "I'm busy keeping half-dead girls alive." Nico appeared in the doorway a second later, carrying his own coffee like a grieving widower. He was younger than I expected, maybe 30, handsome in a way made less dangerous by the fact that he looked perpetually offended by the universe. He stopped when he saw me sitting up. "Ah. Excellent," the witness breathes. "I'm not a witness," I said. "In this house," he took a careful sip. "Everyone's a witness." Teresa smacked the back of his head with a folded napkin as she passed him. "Don't loom over her. You look like a disappointed wolf." "I am disappointed," he muttered. "These eggs are treason." "They're eggs. They're sorrow in oval form." I laughed, then regretted it immediately when my side protested. Nico pointed at me. "See, violence." All because no one respects dietary discipline. Teresa rolled her eyes and left us with strict instructions about broth, tea, and not bleeding through clean linens if I could help it. Nico leaned against the doorframe. "I'm Nico Belandi." Driver, occasional bodyguard, full-time victim of Teresa's bread agenda. Bread agenda. She's trying to kill my abs because she enjoys power. I could not help it. I laughed again, smaller this time. His expression softened. "They're better. You look less like somebody dropped you in the river and forgot to pray." "Thank you, I think." He glanced down the hall, lowered his voice. "If the boss comes in, try not to lie. He knows before the sentence ends." "Do you all talk about him like that when he isn't here?" "No, usually we get quieter." As if summoned by the thought, the room shifted, not from a sound. From absence, the easy air leaving it a heartbeat before Lorenzo stepped in. He wore charcoal trousers and a black sweater today, sleeves pushed once at the forearms. No jacket, no visible weapon. Somehow that was worse. Bianca stood behind him in cream silk and hard amusement, not touching him, not trying to. He looked at the tray Teresa had left. "You ate." "Some." That wasn't an answer, enough to stay conscious. His gaze moved to the bowl, verified it for himself, and only then returned to me. "Good." Nico straightened. "I'll check the car rotation." "You'll eat what Teresa gave you," Bianca said sweetly. His face went tragic. "Bianca, please have mercy." She looked him up and down. "No." He sighed as if history itself had betrayed him and disappeared, muttering something about bread and false testimony. Bianca watched him go with open affection before turning back to me. "He's been in love with Teresa for 3 years and thinks no one can tell." "I can tell," I said. "Exactly." Lorenzo stayed near the window, one hand in his pocket, the signet ring catching light when he moved. "Your brother's phone is dark." The warmth left the room. So he's dead. I didn't say that. You didn't say he was. He let that sit there. Bianca crossed to the chair by my bed and sat. Listen to me carefully, Alina. What happened last night was not random. The page you brought in names shell companies, judges, and port dates from 15 years ago, old enough to matter. Dangerous enough to kill for. My mouth dried. Carlo found it hidden in a church register. He thought it was just numbers until he recognized one of the names. Whose? Lorenzo asked. I hesitated. He saw it. This is where you decide if I can keep you alive. Vittorio Vitelli. The silence after that was so complete I heard a car door shut somewhere outside. Bianca did not look surprised. Lorenzo did not move at all. Your uncle, I said softly. My uncle, Lorenzo agreed. I looked between them. Then why am I still here? If that page hurts your family, shouldn't you want it gone? Bianca's expression changed first, something like pity and admiration meeting halfway. Lorenzo came closer. Because there is family, he said, and there is the rot inside it. There was no boast in his voice, no dramatic bitterness, just a fact laid on the table. I want to go home, I said, though I already knew home was a place that had ended yesterday. No, he said. The word was quiet, absolute. I stared at him. You don't get to say that like you own the roads. No. I get to say it because the men who tried to kill you know your face, your name, and the route to your apartment. His eyes dropped once briefly to the bandage at my side. Until I know who moved against you, and whether Carlo sent you to me out of loyalty or panic. You don't leave this house alone. What if I refuse? Then I put guards on every exit and we both waste time. My temper flashed before my sense did. You can't keep me here. His gaze rested on mine for one long second. Watch me. Something dangerous and humiliating moved low in my stomach at the sheer stillness of him. Not attraction exactly. Not yet, just awareness sharp enough to feel like a wound. Bianca saw more than I wanted her to. He's not threatening you, Alina. That would sound different. That is not comforting. It wasn't intended to be. Lorenzo turned to go, then paused at the door. There are 3 rules. I hated that part of me wanted to hear them. You tell Teresa if the pain worsens, you don't use the house phones, and you do not open any locked door in this house. Why? Because I said so. I should have argued, asked questions. Thrown the tray at him, maybe. Instead, I heard myself say, that's not a real reason. He looked back over his shoulder, the morning light cutting one side of his face into gold and shadow. In my world, he said, it is. Then he left, taking the temperature of the room with him. By the 3rd day, I knew the house by sound. Teresa's shoes were practical and firm on marble. Bianca moved like silk and opinion. Nico announced himself with complaints, usually culinary. Tio Ferraro barely made noise at all, which made him the only person in the house more unsettling than Lorenzo. Lorenz, I knew by the click of the ring. Sometimes against a glass in his office late at night. Sometimes once against the banister when he paused at the foot of the stairs. Sometimes against the edge of the dining table before a decision that changed the shape of the room. It was the sound of a man refusing himself something. My wound kept me slow, which meant I had too much time to think and not enough privacy to do it in. On the 3rd morning, Bianca came to my room with the folded ledger page sealed in a clear sleeve and asked, "Can you do what Carlo said you could?" I looked up too quickly. "He told you. He said you restored damaged paper for the diocesan archive. Water, smoke, mold, erased ink. True." "Yes." Lorenzo was behind her in the hallway. I had not seen him yet, but I knew. The air changed before he entered. He came in a second later carrying a flat archival box I recognized so instantly it hurt. "Where did you get that?" I asked. "Your apartment." I sat straighter. "You searched my things. I secured what matters. That is not the same sentence. It is in this house." I wanted to hate him for how easily he occupied moral ground that was not his. What made it difficult was that the box in his hands held my tools. Soft brushes, lifting knives, cotton gloves, micro spatulas. The little lamp Carlo had once mocked for making my workbench look like a surgical theater. He set the box on the desk near the window. Can you read the page? Maybe, if the fibers aren't too swollen, if no one else has tried to open it wet. Bianca smiled faintly. See. I like her. I'm right here, I said. That's part of the appeal. They moved me to a small library off the East Hall because the light was best there. Walnut shelves, locked cabinets. A saint in painted wood above the mantel with one chipped hand. I put on gloves, steadied my breathing, and made myself forget the armed men outside the door. When I worked, the world simplified. Paper had rules, water left tracks, heat changed texture, iron gall ink browned in a particular way as it aged. Damage was honest even when people were. I eased the damp folds apart millimeter by millimeter while Lorenz watched from the far side of the room with a stillness that should have rattled me more than it did. Bianca sat on the arm of a chair reading messages on her phone. Tio stood by the door like disapproval given human form. No talking, I said softly. Tio blinked. Bianca looked delighted. Lorenzo said nothing at all. I held the page under angled light. Numbers emerged first, then initials. Then under the water stains, another layer, writing done in diluted ink, almost invisible unless you knew how to coax it up. Interesting, I whispered. Lorenzo took one step forward. What? Someone wrote a second list beneath the first, hidden after the original dried. Can you lift it? I can try. He stopped there, respecting the invisible line around my work table. It should not have mattered, it did. 10 minutes later, I saw enough to feel the blood drain from my face. This isn't just shipping, I said. These are payouts, priests, customs, judges. Safe houses. Names, Lorenzo said. I read 3 aloud. Bianca's expression sharpened. Then I saw another one and went cold. No, I said. What? My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. My mother. Nobody spoke. I looked again, hoping I had read it wrong. Rosaria Marini, next to a convent name I had not heard in years. Santa Marta. That can't be right, I whispered. Bianca set down her phone. Why? Because my mother never took money from men like this. My voice sounded thin to my own ears. She restored books for the convent. That was all. Lorenzo's gaze did not leave the page. Sometimes money records don't mean payment. Sometimes they mean proximity, a transfer, a location, a debt. Debt for what? No one answered. The room felt smaller. I swallowed and forced myself back to the page. There's a symbol beside Vittorio's entries, repeating. It might mark the off-book shipments. Can you reproduce it? Bianca asked. I sketched it quickly. Tio went still in the doorway. I've seen that, he said. On crates rooted through Red Hook last winter. Lorenzo turned to him. And you say this now. I didn't know it mattered then. It always matters when my uncle hides his own handwriting. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. A phone buzzed. Bianca checked it first, then looked at Lorenzo. Street contact confirmed the men from that night were Bruni muscle, not freelance. Bruni answers to Vittorio now, Tio said. I looked up. Your uncle sent them. Maybe, Lorenzo said. You say maybe too easily. He shifted his weight and the ring clicked once against the back of a chair. In my experience, certainty arrives late. I should have stopped there. Instead, I asked, and what arrives first? His gaze moved to the bandage hidden under my blouse. Blood. For one strange, unbearable second, the room narrowed to the space between us. The brush in my gloved fingers, the lamplight on his ring. The fact that I could feel where his hands had steadied me 3 nights ago, as if the memory had weight. Bianca cleared her throat on purpose. I looked back down too fast. By late afternoon, I had lifted enough text to identify 3 shell companies, 2 judges, and 1 old convent ledger reference none of us liked. My shoulders ached. My wound throbbed. Lorenzo ordered the work stopped before I admitted I needed to. After Bianca walked me toward the stairs, I paused at the library threshold and glanced back. Lorenzo stood alone now, one hand flat on the desk beside the page, head bowed slightly as if he were reading prayer or threat. For the first time, I wondered what his silence cost him. Lorenzo Carlo Marini knelt in Vittorio's chapel office with his hands shaking under the old man's gaze, and Lorenzo understood two things at once. The boy was guilty, and he was terrified enough to betray again. From the corridor, unseen, Lorenzo watched Vittorio rest a paternal hand on Carlo's shoulder. "Family," his uncle said softly, "is the only thing worth surviving for." It was the same lie he had used on Lorenzo at 19. When Lorenzo turned away, he could still hear Elena in the library telling him not to speak while she saved what water had nearly destroyed. Someone had already sold them. The first time Lorenzo touched me without necessity, thunder shook the glass. We were driving north to one of the Vitelli country properties because Tio said city walls leaked and Lorenzo believed in distance when trust ran thin. Rain lashed the windows so hard the highway blurred into silver bands. I sat in the back seat trying not to wince every time the car hit a seam in the road. Nico drove like a man offended by weather on principle. "This storm," he declared, "is anti-Italian. We were built for opera, not this biblical nonsense." From the front passenger seat, Bianca didn't look up from her phone. "You were built for complaints. I am a vessel for truth. You're a vessel for caffeine." He made a wounded sound. "Teresa packed me boiled chicken." "Do you know what that does to morale?" I laughed before I could stop myself. Lorenzo, seated beside me, turned his head slightly. "Pain only when I laugh. Then Belandi should be silent." "Boss," Nico said, "I take emotional issue with that." No one is surprised. Even Tio, in the second car behind us, crackled over the radio with what might have been a swallowed laugh. It was the first easy moment I had seen Lorenzo allow. He did not smile fully, but something in his shoulders eased. Rain tracked silver down the window behind him. His hand rested on his thigh, the signet ring dark in the storm light. He looked like a man carved for patience and used instead for violence. When the first shot hit the rear windshield, the whole car changed shape. The glass starred white. Bianca ducked. Nico cursed in 3 languages and threw the car hard left. Lorenzo's arm came across me before I understood what had happened, pressing me down against the seat. "Down," he said, "another shot." Then another. My cheek hit leather. My side screamed. Bianca already had a gun in her hand. Lorenzo's body half-covered mine, one palm at the back of my neck, not crushing, not careless. Just there. "Second car compromised." Tio's voice snapped over the radio. Nico gritted his teeth. "Tell me something I can use." "Farm road 200 yards ahead." "Bless you." The car swerved off the highway onto mud and gravel so violently I bit back a cry. Lorenzo felt it. "Stay with me," he said into my hair. I wanted to tell him I was not going anywhere. Instead, I held onto the edge of his coat and tried not to hear the gunfire behind us. We made the cellar door because Lorenzo chose it, not because anyone else would have. The old farmhouse sat abandoned above a stand of black trees, but the storm cellar was dry, stocked, wired, and clearly not as forgotten as it pretended to be. Nico slammed the inner door and leaned against it, panting. "If I die in a basement on boiled chicken, I will haunt all of you." Bianca handed him an extra magazine. "Try haunting quietly." Tio came in 30 seconds later, blood on his sleeve, jaw set. "Grazed, not mine." That told me whose it was. Lorenzo turned to me. "Let me see. I'm fine, little saint." That was all he said. My refusal vanished under it. He guided me to a narrow wooden bench beneath a bare bulb, while Bianca and Tio spread weapons and maps over an old crate. Nico, who had apparently decided near death improved his spiritual life, crossed himself dramatically and muttered, "Dear Lord, thank you for not letting the boss kill anyone today." "That we know of." Even Tio looked at him. "What?" Nico said. "I'm expressing gratitude." "Badly," Bianca replied. Lorenzo crouched in front of me and peeled back the edge of the bandage with steady hands. Rain darkened his hair at the temples. There was a cut along his jaw I had not seen before. "You're bleeding," I said. "So are you." "That's not an answer." One of his brows moved almost imperceptibly. He cleaned the wound anyway, fingers careful in a way that hurt more than roughness would have. I watched his hands because it was safer than watching his face. There was a pale scar across his left wrist, thin and old. "You never stop noticing things, do you?" he said without looking up. "I restore damaged paper." "Observation is the job." "And what do you see?" I should have lied. "That you're trying not to hurt me even while you're hurting someone else in your head." His hands went still. The storm above us boomed once, low and enormous. I had stepped somewhere private by accident. I knew it from the silence that followed. Then Lorenzo wrapped the fresh bandage, slower than before. "My sister hated storms," he said. I looked at him carefully. This felt less like confession than splinter, something forced loose by pressure. "She used to count between lightning and thunder," he continued. "Said if she knew the distance, it couldn't surprise her." "What happened to her?" His expression changed so little another person might have missed it. I didn't. "She misjudged the distance." Before I could answer, Nico groaned from the supply shelf. "There are canned beans in here. This is targeted suffering." Bianca looked heavenward. "You live through gunfire and still God punishes me with you." "It's because I'm handsome," Nico said sadly. "Beauty invites persecution." The laugh I let out was helpless and soft. Lorenzo looked up at the sound, not at my mouth, at my face, as if he had earned something by drawing it out of me. His hand stayed around my ankle a second longer than it needed to after checking my balance when I stood. That was the first almost. Not a kiss. Not anything clean. Just his hand warmed through my sock, while the storm shook the world, and everyone else pretended not to see. When the radio crackled with news that 2 Bruni men had been taken alive, and one had said Vittorio's name before losing teeth, Lorenzo stood. The softness left him so fast it made me cold. "We move at first light," he said. "And if it's Vittorio," Bianca asked. "It is." Tio checked his weapon. "Then this is no longer cleanup." "No," Lorenzo said. "It's family." He turned away before anyone could read more than that. But as he passed me, his fingers brushed the back of my hand, just once. By accident, maybe, or not. I felt it long after he crossed the room. By the time we returned to the city, my life before Lorenzo felt like something I had once restored for a stranger, handled carefully, then given back, no longer mine. He put me in the East House off Gramercy Park, smaller than the Mercer place but tighter, easier to secure. Teresa ran it with military grace. Bianca came and went. Tio watched the perimeter with the expression of a man expecting disappointment from every breathing thing. Nico brought coffee, gossip, and ongoing grief about carbohydrates. Lorenzo appeared in intervals and absences. Sometimes I would not see him for 12 hours, and then suddenly find him in the kitchen at midnight, jacket off. One hand braced on the counter, while he read messages no one else was allowed to touch. Once he looked up and found me in the doorway in Teresa's borrowed sweater and socks. "Can't sleep?" he asked. I should have said yes and gone back upstairs. Instead, I noticed the cut on his jaw had reopened. "There's blood on your face," I said. He touched it with 2 fingers as if it belonged to another man. "Occupational." I crossed to the drawer where Teresa kept the first aid supplies before I thought better of it. "Sit." His gaze lifted. The kitchen was silent except for the refrigerator hum and a distant siren outside the townhouse walls. He should have refused. In his place, I would have. But after one long second, he pulled out a chair and sat. The signet ring tapped once against the wood as he settled his hand on the table. I cleaned the cut carefully. My fingers shook once when I felt the heat of his skin, and I hated that he probably noticed. He noticed everything. "Your brother called today," he said. I froze. Why am I hearing that now? Because I wanted to know whether he would hang up first. I set the gauze down too hard. Did he? No, he cried. That hurt more than if Carlo had cursed him. My brother never cried in front of people. He used jokes where other people used honesty. What did he say? That he was sorry. For what? Lorenzo's eyes held mine. He didn't say. I looked away first. The next morning Tio brought in a sealed evidence folder from one of Vittorio's burned storage sites. Inside were fragments of ledger paper fused at the edges by heat and water. I should not have been excited. I was. "I can recover some of this," I said. Tio frowned. "From ash, from damage," I corrected. Lorenzo watched me lay out the fragments under magnification. "You like this? I like making ruined things legible." The words landed harder than I intended. He felt it. So did I. Hours later, under filtered light and solvent fumes, a pattern emerged. Not just payouts. Names nested under shipments. One of the coded symbols matched the mark Tio had seen on Red Hook crates. Another matched an emblem I recognized from a book in my mother's old chest, a mark used by Santa Marta Convent on donated bindings. My hand stopped. "What?" Bianca asked. I drew a careful breath. "This fragment lists a transfer from Santa Marta the week before my mother died." Lorenzo's head lifted. "How?" "She was never there officially after I was 6. She told me the roof leaked and the library smelled like mushrooms. She said she never wanted to go back." I stared at the ink until the letters blurred. Why would Vittorio be moving anything through a convent? No one answered. I pressed harder. "Tell me what you're not saying." Bianca and Tio both looked at Lorenzo. He stayed silent too long. Finally Bianca exhaled. "Because years ago Santa Marta hid a woman Vittorio wanted, and a girl with her." The room tipped. "A girl?" I whispered. Lorenzo's gaze stayed on the paper, not me. "My sister." I could hear my own pulse. "My mother was there." Yes. That single word split something open in me. My mother had died with hands stained by glue and ink, not blood. She had told me once, when I was 11 and crying over a torn prayer book, that you could tell the measure of a person by what they apologized for. I had thought it was about manners. Suddenly it was something else entirely. "She knew your sister, maybe." His voice was iron-smoothed flat. "Maybe she tried to help." "And did she?" That was when he finally looked at me. "I don't know." The tenderness of not lying should not have hit me as hard as it did. Tio's phone buzzed. He checked it, face hardening. "We've got movement on one of Carlo's credit lines." "Midtown Hotel, he's alive." Relief and fury crashed together so fast I had to grip the table. "I'm going to him." Lorenzo's answer was immediate. "No, you do not get to decide. I do when your brother may be bait. I don't care." "That," he said very softly, "is the problem." The kitchen went still around us. He stood, and I thought for one awful second he would put hands on me, force the argument by force. Instead he stepped back, away, chose distance with visible effort. Second, restraint. My throat tightened at the sight of it. "I will bring him to you if I can," he said. "If you can." His jaw moved. "If he lets himself be brought." When he left, the room felt cut open. Hours later Nico found me in the pantry staring blindly at shelves of flour and canned tomatoes. "You look like Teresa finally told you her lasagna recipe is hereditary," he said. I gave him a weak smile. He leaned against the jam. "For what it's worth, the boss only gets that quiet when he's afraid." "Of what?" Nico studied me a moment. "Depends which answer would scare you more." That night, alone in the library, I restored one last strip of burned paper and saw my brother's name under Vittorio's. Not beside it, under it. The call came just before dusk. Tio answered, listened, and swore once under his breath. Carlo had agreed to meet at Santa Marta's abandoned chapel in Harlem, the last building left standing from the old convent after fire and gentrification finished the rest. He wanted Elena alone. He said he had proof Vittorio planned to move against Lorenzo before dawn. "No," Lorenzo said the moment Tio finished. I was already on my feet. "Yes, it's a trap. It's my brother. That's why it's a trap." Bianca folded her arms. "He'll watch from a distance anyway, Elena. Save your outrage for later." I looked at Lorenzo. "If Carlo thinks I'm bringing you, he won't show. He may not show regardless. Then let me find out." Lorenzo said nothing for a long time. That was always worse than anger. At last he turned to Tio. "3-car perimeter, rooftops. No one fires unless I do." He looked at me then. "You stay where I put you." It was not agreement, it was surrender with conditions. Santa Marta's chapel looked smaller than my childhood memory of it, stone blackened by old smoke, saints chipped at the eyes, ivy forcing itself through cracked mortar. The city around it had changed. The cold on the steps had not. I stood under the broken portico in a wool coat Bianca forced me into and listened to the hush of armed men hidden where I could not see them. "Carlo," I called. My voice disappeared into the dark. The first answer was not my brother. It was gunfire. Glass burst behind me. Lorenzo was suddenly there, one arm locking around my waist and taking me down behind the stone basin of a dead fountain. I did not see him reach me. 1 second I was alone. The next I was folded under his body while bullets slapped stone. "Stay down," he said. "I hate when you're right. That's inconvenient for both of us." The sound I made might have been a laugh or fear. Tio's voice cut across the courtyard somewhere left. Bianca answered from the right. Nico, incredibly, shouted, "If anyone shoots the coat Teresa picked, I'm reporting all of you." Then Lorenzo rose into the gunfire like it had insulted him personally. I caught only pieces after that. The recoil in his arms, the bright, terrifying precision of him, a man hitting the chapel rail and falling backward into broken snow, Tio dragging another shooter from cover. Bianca firing one-handed and immaculate. Then a hand caught my ankle. I screamed and kicked on instinct. A man rose from behind the fountain, blood at his mouth, knife in hand. Before I could draw breath, Lorenzo was back. He took the man's wrist, broke it cleanly, and drove him face first into stone with such brutal efficiency my entire body went cold. He did not shout. That was the worst part. He looked down at the man writhing in the slush and said, almost conversationally, "Who sent you?" The man spat red. Lorenzo did something with his hand I did not fully see. Bone cracked. The answer came as a whimper. "Vittorio." Then Lorenzo hit him once, precise and final, and the courtyard went strangely quiet. I stared at him. He turned back to me with blood across his knuckles that was not his own. The cold had painted his face in sharpened lines. For one terrible moment, I understood exactly what his world required of him. And still, when he crouched in front of me, his voice was gentle. "Look at me, little saint." I did. "Are you hit?" I shook my head. Only then did he touch me, hands at my face, my shoulders, my arms, checking, counting, making sure I was whole. His fingers trembled once, just once. I felt it because I was no longer capable of pretending not to notice him. "Carlo," I whispered. Lorenzo's mouth hardened. "Gone before we arrived." It should have devastated me more than it did. Instead, I felt the shape of another truth pressing in. My brother had called me there, and my brother had not stayed. War had chosen its side. Back at Gramercy, Teresa stitched Tio's shoulder while Nico paced and delivered a furious eulogy for Coates and peace of mind. Bianca disappeared to coordinate retaliation. The house smelled of gun oil, wool, and melting snow. I found Lorenzo alone in the rear sitting room with a cut above his brow and blood drying at his cuff. Firelight touched one side of his face. His ring tapped once against the untouched whiskey glass in his hand. Warning, restraint, fear. I crossed to him before courage failed. "You're hurt. I've been worse. That doesn't make it good." "No." His gaze dropped to my hands. "It doesn't." I took the cloth from the side table and stood close enough to clean the blood from his temple. He let me. That was the third restraint and maybe the cruelest. How still he stayed while every part of him seemed drawn tight as wire. "Why me?" I whispered, because the question had become too large to keep. His eyes lifted to mine. He did not answer aloud, not then. Instead, he reached up, wrapped careful fingers around my wrist, and pressed his forehead briefly to the inside of it as if the gesture had escaped him before he could stop it. My breath caught. "If you stop now," I said, voice shaking, "I think I'll be glad and sorry at the same time." The room changed. He looked at me as though I had handed him something breakable and irreversible. "Elena." I had never heard my name like that, not from anyone. He rose slowly, giving me every second to move away. I didn't. His hand came to my cheek first, warm, roughened at the palm. Reverent enough to undo me. When he kissed me, it was not possession. It was restraint breaking in measured pieces. His mouth moved against mine once slow enough that I felt the question in it before the answer. His mouth was warm, controlled, devastatingly careful. He kissed me like a man standing on the edge of something he had sworn never to cross and hated himself for wanting to. When he drew back, it was only far enough to look at me. My hand had somehow found his shirt. I let go at once, embarrassed by the evidence of it, but he caught my fingers before they could fall. "Don't do that," he said quietly. "What? Pretend you didn't touch me." The honesty of that almost undid me more than the kiss had. I could still taste smoke and whiskey and the winter air he carried in with him. The fire snapped softly behind us. Somewhere in the house a floorboard creaked, then settled. Nothing else moved. I swallowed. If I say I don't understand what's happening, it will be a lie. And if I say I want to stop, it will be one. My breath caught. He lifted my hand to his mouth and pressed one kiss against the inside of my wrist, directly over the pulse. It felt frighteningly intimate, more intimate than the first kiss. More dangerous, too, because he looked at me while he did it, as if asking whether I knew what I was handing him. Then the phone on the side table rang. Lorenzo shut his eyes once briefly, with the expression of a man who had been granted one mercy and immediately charged for it. He released my hand and answered on the second ring. "Yes." The voice on the other end was loud enough that I heard only fragments. Pier, Red Hook, 2 dead, fire. War had not knocked, it had let itself in. Lorenzo listened without interrupting. That I was learning was when he was most dangerous, when his face emptied, when his shoulders went still, when the ring on his hand found the rim of the whiskey glass and clicked just once. "Lock every exterior route," he said at last. "No one moves her without Bianca or Tio. I'll be there in 15. He hung up and stood. Something in me went cold at the speed of it. How fast the man who had kissed me disappeared behind the one the city feared. But not entirely. I still saw the crack in the mask because I had been close enough to feel it. He looked down at me. "You stay in the house." "No," the word came out before thought. His gaze sharpened. "Elena, you said this was war. Don't ask me to sit upstairs and pretend I can't hear it. I'm not asking. That has become very clear. For one dangerous second, I thought we were going to shatter the room with it." Then his eyes dropped to my mouth. Just once, brief, unmistakable, third almost becoming something else, then stopping again. When he spoke, his voice was lower. "There are men outside waiting for one mistake from me. You will not be it." The words should have angered me more than they did. Instead, they hurt. "Is that all I am?" I asked. His face changed. "Not much enough. No," he sounded as if the word had cost skin. "That's the problem." He turned and crossed to the door. "Lorenzo." He stopped without looking back. "Did you ever decide why me?" For a moment I thought he would leave anyway. Then, very briefly, the answer came in the only place he ever let himself tell the truth before he was ready. Lorenzo, it was her voice on the threshold. Lock the door. Not save me. Not help me. Protect the woman who had just told her he was mine. Then, bleeding through her coat, she had looked at his marble and apologized for the mess as if her pain were an inconvenience she hated bringing into other people's houses. No one in his world did that. No one had ever done that. When he finally looked back at her, there was too much in his face to survive being spoken aloud. Because, he said, you were dying and you still thought of everyone else first. Then he left before she could answer, and the ring clicked once against the doorframe as he went. War had arrived. The first body came in wrapped in a wool blanket that used to be mine. I knew it by the torn seam at the edge, the one Teresa had promised to mend, and never did because something in this house was always more urgent than domestic perfection. The man inside it was one of the younger guards from Gramercy, barely older than 20, with rain still caught in his hair and a hole in the center of his throat. Someone had laid his hands neatly over his chest before carrying him in. That detail was what broke me, not the blood, not the smell of iron and wet wool in the foyer, the neatness. The human attempt to make violence look orderly once it was done. Teresa crossed herself. Bianca took one slow breath and became all steel again. Nico, for once, said nothing. Lorenzo stood at the foot of the stairs listening while Tio gave the report in a flat, controlled voice. 2 more dead at the docks. 1 warehouse burned. A judge on Vittorio's payroll missing. Carlo still unaccounted for. Bruni men moving openly through Queens like they had already decided whose city this was. This was never about the page alone, Bianca said. No, Lorenzo replied. It's about succession. The word settled over the room like dust after collapse. Succession, not business, not cleanup, bloodline claim. Who would become the face of the family when the old rot finally had to choose a shape? Tio's sleeve was dark with fresh blood again. He had not let Teresa look at it yet. I stared at him. You're hurt. He looked almost offended by the observation. Occupational. I hated that everyone in Lorenzo's world answered pain with the same joke. When the meeting broke apart into movement and orders, Lorenzo came to me last. He always did that now, as if leaving me for the end made the decision harder. You're leaving tonight, he said. The room disappeared around the sentence. No, you don't get a vote. I am becoming deeply tired of your democracy. For the first time all day, Nico made a sound that might have been a laugh strangled on its way out. Bianca cut him a look and he pretended to inspect the deadbolts. Lorenzo did not. Boston, Teresa has a cousin there. You'll stay until this is finished. Finished by whom? By me. I stepped closer before good sense could stop me. Do you know what it feels like when you say things like that? As if everyone else is furniture and only your choices are real. His jaw tightened. This isn't philosophy, Alina. It's triage. And if I don't want saving, that doesn't matter. The lie was so obvious it made me angrier. Bianca intervened before I could. Come upstairs, she said. You can hate him more efficiently while packing. I let her lead me because if Lorenzo touched my arm just then, I might have done something humiliating. Like cry, or stay. In the bedroom, Bianca shut the door and pulled a suitcase from the wardrobe. For a while she packed in silence, folding sweaters with the terrifying calm of a woman who had learned to survive men like Lorenzo, by never spilling her own center. Finally I asked, were you ever really his mistress? She smiled without amusement. Publicly, yes. Privately, God, no. I blinked at her. She tucked stockings into a side compartment. Men leave some things alone if they think another man is already using them. It made negotiations simpler. It also kept certain ambitious fathers from offering daughters at dinner. I sat on the edge of the bed too quickly and winced. So when you said he was yours, at the door, she looked up. I was testing you. That's an awful thing to do to a bleeding woman. Yes, and you still told me to lock the door. Bianca's expression softened in a way I had never seen from her. Do you know how rare that is in our world? Lorenzo had said almost the same thing. It landed harder now. She zipped the bag closed. You should go. Do you want me to? Yes, she did not bother lying. I also know you won't. That should have comforted me, it didn't. By the time evening fell, the city outside the car windows had become all reflected lights and wet black streets. Nico drove. Teresa sat in front with her rosary and a travel thermos. Tio followed in another car even though, according to Bianca, he should have been in a clinic getting stitches and bullied by nurses. No one used Lorenzo's name. No one had to. At Penn Station, the air smelled like coffee, metal brakes, and damp coats. Ordinary life moved around us with insulting indifference. Families with rolling suitcases. A teenager asleep on his backpack. A woman arguing into a headset over conference call logistics, while war rearranged my life by the hour. Nico carried my bag and looked personally offended by the fluorescent lighting. If Teresa's cousin makes kale soup, I'm getting back on the train with you. Teresa snatched his scarf straight. You'll do what you're told for once and stop talking like a widow. He lowered his voice toward me. She likes me best when I suffer. I heard that, Teresa said. That was intentional. I smiled in spite of myself, and the smile hurt because it felt like treason. On the platform, Tio moved closer. He had fresh bandaging under his collar and the exhausted eyes of a man running on duty and very little else. Your compartment is secured. You should be lying down, I said. He gave me a long look. So should you most days. That was as near affection as Tio ever came, and it frightened me a little. The train doors opened. This was real, not a tactic. Not another locked room argument with Lorenzo, waiting on the other side to overrule it. There was only the warm breath of the train, my suitcase, Teresa's worried eyes, Nico trying not to look worried at all. And the clean cut of a future where I could leave now, and never again learn what blood looked like drying on Lorenzo's cuffs. I put one foot on the step, then Tio's phone buzzed. He checked it and the color left his face. What? I said. He looked at me once, at the train, at the floor. Decision crossed his features too late. Tio, he exhaled. Your archive called. The Rome Fellowship sent for you this afternoon. Full restoration appointment. They rescinded it after police inquiries hit the diocesan offices. His voice went flatter. Your name is contaminated. For a second I did not understand the words. Then I did. Rome. The fellowship I had worked for since I was 19. The one Carlo used to toast with cheap supermarket wine because neither of us could afford the good kind. Gone. Not postponed. Gone. That was what leaving cost now. Not safety exactly. Not even Lorenzo. The self I had been before his threshold. A train announcement crackled overhead. Final boarding. I looked at the open door in front of me. Then at the people I had somehow started thinking of as mine in the strangest possible ways. Teresa with her iron kindness. Nico with his ruined diet and soft heart. Tio bleeding through his shirt because he refused to do anything halfway. Bianca waiting somewhere in a war-sick house. And Lorenzo, who had not come because if he had, I might have chosen him for the wrong reason. I stepped onto the train. Teresa closed her eyes in relief. Then I reached back down, took my suitcase from Nico and stepped off again. No one spoke. I'm not staying because I can't leave, I said, hearing my own heart in every word. I'm staying because now I know what it costs, and I'm choosing it anyway. Tio stared at me as if I had just changed the geometry of the station. Nico blinked twice. The boss is going to look so unbearable when I tell him. Please don't tell him like that, I said. I absolutely will. I turned toward the stairs, toward the city, toward the dark. And this time I walked back in myself. I made my mistake 2 days later. That is the only honest way to say it. People like to imagine catastrophe arrives dressed as sacrifice or courage, something noble enough to excuse what follows. Mine arrived wearing impatience, exhaustion. The private, arrogant belief that because I had finally chosen Lorenzo's world with open eyes, I understood how to move through it. I didn't. The clue came in the most ordinary way possible. A hymn book from Santa Marta delivered in an evidence box with soot at the edges and no return label. Tio had sent it up from the office because the inside cover carried the same hand-marked symbol I had found beneath Vittorio's ledger entries. I should have waited. Instead, I took it to the library, put on gloves, and worked alone while the house slept around me. The binding had been repaired badly once before. Cheap glue, uneven stitching. Someone in a hurry with no love for paper. Under the pasted-down rear end paper, I found a second layer. Beneath that, a narrow strip of vellum folded small enough to hide inside the spine. On it, written in faded iron gall ink only half legible through time, were 6 words in Latin and 1 address in English. Choir loft, midnight, come alone. At the bottom, in my brother's hand, please. I stared at it until the letters doubled. Carlo had taught me to ride a bicycle by running behind me in the church parking lot until he let go, and I did not realize it for a full 10 seconds. Carlo used to steal cannoli ends from bakery trays and bring them home in wax paper when our mother worked late. Carlo also sent me to a chapel where men with guns were waiting. These truths lived beside each other now. Neither canceled the other. I told myself I was only confirming the trap. I left a note. That was my attempt at responsibility. 4 words on Lorenzo's desk under a paperweight heavy enough not to slide. At Santa Marta, trust me. A ridiculous sentence. As if trust were a bridge and not the ravine beneath it. By the time I climbed the broken back stairs to the chapel choir loft, the night had turned bitter. Dust and old incense lived in the beams. Moonlight knifed through cracked stained glass and laid red and blue wounds across the floorboards. Carlo! My voice came back to me from the rafters. Then a lamp clicked on behind the organ. My brother stepped into the light wearing a coat too expensive for him and a face I recognized only in pieces. Thinner, hollowed, one cheek bruised yellow at the edge. His eyes were the same, which made it worse. Elena, I hated how much relief hurt. You're alive. He laughed once without humor, for the moment. I did not move closer. At least I got that right. Did you send the men to the chapel steps? His face flinched. That was answer enough. I wrapped my arms around myself because otherwise my hands might have done anything. Why? Because Vittorio said they'd scare you, not hurt you. And you believed him. His mouth twisted. I believed I had no good options left. Carlo, I know. He looked at the floorboards. I know. For one suspended second I thought he might tell the truth cleanly. Then footsteps sounded below us. Several pairs, deliberate, unhurried. I went still. Carlo closed his eyes. I'm sorry. The apology landed like a blade because it arrived too late. Vittorio Vitelli emerged from the dark beneath the loft with 2 men at his back, elegant in charcoal overcoat and gloves, silver hair immaculate, face lined into benevolence by years of practice. He looked exactly like the kind of man old women trusted at fundraisers. That more than anything made him monstrous. My dear Elena, he said, at last. I backed away from the railing. If you wanted the page, you could have asked less theatrically, he smiled, and miss meeting the girl who turned my nephew sentimental. I'm not sentimental, Carlo muttered. Vittorio didn't spare him a glance. No, only weak. There it was, the mirror beneath Lorenzo's story. A man who had turned control into virtue because feeling anything softer made him contemptible in his own eyes. What do you want? I asked. The same thing every family wants. Continuity. He removed one glove finger by finger. Lorenzo is becoming inconvenient. He has started separating blood from rot. Men who do that are dangerous to old houses. And killing me helps. Not kill, he sounded offended. Trade, you are useful alive. Lorenzo will come when he reads your note. Cold moved through me all at once. You knew I'd leave one. Vittorio smiled faintly. Because you are conscientious. It's one of your lovelier flaws. I looked at Carlo, really looked. You brought him my note before Lorenzo could read it. He swallowed. The grief of it was almost clean, cleaner than rage. My significant mistake, there in full shape. I had trusted the oldest version of my brother instead of the newest truth about him. Vittorio nodded to one of his men. He started up the stairs. I moved backward until my spine hit the choir railing. The old wood groaned. Beside the organ bench hung a thick bell rope, frayed but intact. Beneath my left hand sat the hymn book I had carried up with me. Beneath my right the lamp oil Carlo had lit and left uncapped. Paper, glue, rope, weight. My world was never guns, it was materials. Failure points, what held and what gave. The man reached the top stair. I knocked the oil lamp into the old hymnals. Flame went up fast across dry paste and cloth. Everyone shouted at once. Smoke punched upward. The first gunman lunged, and I threw the hymn book into his face hard enough to stagger him, then grabbed the bell rope with both hands and swung my weight. The ancient bell above the chapel tore loose one cracked note so violent it seemed to split the night in half. Signal, warning, prayer, fire licked up the side wall. Vittorio swore for the first time, ugly and human. Carlo grabbed my arm. Move, I ripped free. Don't touch me. Below us, somewhere outside, car doors slammed. Lorenzo had read the note after all. The loft filled with smoke. Footsteps thundered in the nave. And then I heard the one sound I had come to know better than my own fear. A ring striking wood once in the dark below. Smoke changed everything. Distance, judgment, time. It turned the chapel into a throat trying to close around us all at once. Below the loft, Vittorio's men shouted over the sudden fire while flames licked greedily along the dry hymnals and climbed the back of the organ case. Carlo coughed hard enough to bend at the waist. The bell rope burned against my palms as I tried to climb down the side ladder away from the stair where the gunman had already recovered. Then a shot cracked from the nave floor. Not wild. Not panicked, precise. The first man on the stairs dropped backward into smoke. Lorenzo. I did not see him fully at first. Only pieces. Black coat moving through red light, one shoulder lowered against falling plaster, the hard line of his arm as he fired again. Tio came in from the side aisle bleeding fresh through his bandage and still impossibly steady. Bianca's voice cut through the smoke from the rear doors, ordering someone to flank left. And somewhere absurdly close to me Nico yelled, "If anyone dies in a church, Teresa wins every argument forever." Even terror could not entirely kill the laugh that rose in my throat. Carlo heard it and looked at me with something like grief. He really came. Yes, I said. My brother closed his eyes once, as if that answer had punished him more efficiently than anything else could have. The loft floor groaned beneath us. Fire had reached the old joists faster than I expected. I made another mistake then, smaller and more honest than the first. I thought I had 1 second more than I did. The board under my right foot gave way. I dropped to one knee with a cry and would have gone through entirely if Carlo had not grabbed the back of my coat. Splinters tore my stocking. Heat punched up through the hole. Elena, below, Lorenzo looked up. I had never seen a face go that still. He moved toward the ladder, but 2 of Vittorio's men cut across the aisle. He dispatched the first with a shot to the shoulder that spun him against a pew. The second with such frightening economy that I felt the old terror again, the knowledge of what he was when he stopped choosing gentleness. The difference now was that terror no longer pushed me away from him. It drove me toward survival. I tore the scorched hem of my coat free from the splintered board and climbed. Carlo shoved the half-collapsed organ bench after me to widen the gap between us and the fire. For one brief second, in smoke and ruin. We were children again, solving a problem with our hands before adults arrived to make it worse. Then Vittorio spoke from below. "You see," he called to Lorenzo, "this is what happens when women become leverage. You used to understand that." I froze at the sound of it, not because of the insult, because of the used to mirror. Alternate self. The man Lorenzo feared becoming had always spoken to him like inheritance. Lorenzo answered from the nave floor, his voice carrying through smoke like a blade through cloth. "No. I used to obey." That line landed somewhere so deep in me, I knew I would hear it years from now in completely quiet rooms. The ladder shook as Tio reached it from below. "Come down." Carlo looked between me and the aisle where Vittorio was retreating behind stone, using his own men as cover. "Go. You come too." His laugh this time was almost gentle. "That's not how this ends for me." I wanted to deny it. I wanted to pull him bodily down through the smoke and the years and all the choices that had brought us here. But I knew him well enough even now to hear finality when it stood in front of me. "Tell him," Carlo said roughly, eyes red from smoke and something worse. "Tell Lorenzo our mother tried to move Chiara through the convent tunnels. She got the girl to the street. Vittorio found them there. Mama died because she wouldn't tell him where the child had gone. The world narrowed to that sentence. She saved her. For 6 more minutes," Carlo whispered. "I'm sorry those were all she got." The loft shuddered. Tio swore up at us. "Now, Elena," I started down. Halfway I looked back. Carlo stood in firelight with the bell rope behind him, and the smoke turning him into memory before he was even gone. He gave me one small nod, the same one he used to give when letting go of the bicycle. Then he kicked the burning organ bench into the stairwell and turned toward Vittorio's men with a gun I had never seen him draw. I did not watch what came after. Lorenzo caught me at the bottom of the ladder so hard I felt the violence of relief in it, not crushing, just absolute. His hands framed my face, my shoulders, the back of my neck, counting me, proving me as if touch were the only language left. I could not speak, neither could he, so I did the only thing I knew. I put my hands on his chest and stayed there. His forehead came down to mine for one raw second while smoke and gunfire raged around us. When he finally pulled back, his eyes went to my burned palm. "You climbed on that." I had poor options. Something awful and almost tender moved through his face. Nico appeared out of nowhere with soot on his jaw and a chapel candlestick in his hand like a medieval failure. I would like it recorded that I hate all of this, and also religion has become too interactive. Even Lorenzo made a sound through his nose that was nearly laughter. Then the rear wall boomed with another impact. Vittorio was escaping through the old convent passageways. Tio staggered toward us, one hand clamped to his side now, not shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Tunnel access," he said. "East crypt." I looked at Lorenzo. "Our mother saved Chiara through tunnels." His whole body went still. "What?" I told him in as few words as possible because there was no time for grief, only direction. Vittorio had lost Chiara once in the tunnels because of my mother. He knew them. He would use them now. Lorenzo looked toward the crypt entrance, then back at me. For one terrible moment I thought he would leave me behind again. Instead he handed his second weapon to Nico. "Get her outside." "I'm coming," I said. "No." "Lorenzo." He stepped closer, firelight red across his cheekbones, smoke in his hair, love and fear both still unnamed between us. "This is the last time I let him take anything through you," he said quietly. "Not from you. Through you." Then he kissed my forehead once, savage with restraint, and turned toward the crypt. By the time I found breath again, I knew one of us might not survive what came next. We found Vittorio at the harbor because paper told us where blood would go. That sentence would sound dramatic to anyone who had never spent her life reading the habits of men through ink. To me, it felt simple. The hidden mark beneath Vittorio's ledgers. the same one burned into the Santa Marta hymn book. Matched old dock inventory numbers from Red Hook shipping records Lorenzo's accountants had seized overnight. Not the main port, a decommissioned customs pier used during Prohibition and never fully abandoned because men like Vittorio considered history a storage unit. By dawn the city was all iron light and exhausted rain. Tio should have been in a hospital. Teresa said so with a kind of sacred fury. Tio ignored her with the same discipline he brought to gunfire. Bianca went silent in a way that made everyone else careful. Nico brought espresso in paper cups and announced, "If I die on no sleep and half a croissant, haunt management for me." Teresa, who had come only long enough to bully medicine into Tio and press my burned palm into salve, said, "You won't die. You're too stubborn and too underfed." Nico looked faintly moved. "That is the kindest thing you've ever said." She smoothed his collar once with practical fingers. "Don't make it an event." He nearly walked into a door. Lorenzo stood apart near the pier blueprint table with his coat off, shirt sleeves rolled, a fresh strip of bandage crossing one knuckle under the signet ring. I had not had a proper chance to speak to him since the chapel. We had been moving too fast for tenderness and too injured for pride. When I crossed to him, he looked up immediately. "How es Tio?" I asked, staying conscious out of spite. "That seems consistent." His mouth almost softened. Then he saw the salve on my hand and took my wrist gently. "You should be resting. You should have chosen a less combustible enemy." He looked at my palm longer than necessary. "I came back to smoke." The words were so quiet I almost missed them. "What?" His thumb hovered near the edge of the burn without touching it. "At Santa Marta. I came back too late to save my sister from him. When I smelled the smoke tonight, I was 19 again." It was the most direct thing he had ever told me about the night that made him. I swallowed around the weight of it. "My mother got her 6 minutes." "Yes." His eyes lifted to mine. "And I've hated myself for years because 6 minutes should have been enough." Before I could answer, Bianca joined us with a file box. "Sentimental reconciliation later." I found the custom seal index. Inside were old manifests and one notarized transfer sheet bearing Vittorio's private signature under a different company name. The timestamp matched the same week Chiara died. Hidden in the carbon layers was a destination code, not cargo, person. "She wasn't collateral," I whispered. "He moved her like inventory." Lorenzo's face emptied. That was the moment I knew Vittorio would not survive the morning. The assault itself lasted 12 minutes and altered the shape of my life again. The old customs pier was all rusted beams, tide stink, broken windows, and the particular silence of armed men pretending not to tremble. Tio took the west approach with 2 loyal crews. Bianca handled the office block where the records would be, if Vittorio had any instinct for self-preservation. Nico stayed with me in the side intake corridor because Lorenzo had ordered it and because, for all his complaints, Nico was the kind of man who stood where fear told him not to. "I hate harbors," he whispered as we moved past stacked crates. "Too many places for bullets to have hobbies." "Thank you," I whispered back. "That helps. You're welcome." One of Vittorio's men stepped out from behind a forklift before either of us heard him fully. Nico hit him with the butt of his weapon and muttered, "I'm supposed to be on a Mediterranean diet, not a combat one." Then the first real wave of gunfire started. From my position behind a concrete intake wall, I saw only angles of Lorenzo, his shoulder at the loading bay, the flash of his weapon. The terrifying steadiness of his body as men twice his size made the mistake of thinking rage and skill were the same thing. They weren't. Rage wasted motion. Lorenzo never did. I moved when I saw the file cabinets in the pier office catch from a tipped lantern, not toward the fighting, toward the records. Nico realized it half a second later. "Elena, absolutely not. I need the transfer sheets." You need common sense. But he came with me anyway, swearing in a way that sounded devotional by the time we reached the office. Inside, smoke curled under the ceiling. I found the drawer by matching the seal numbers from Bianca's index and ripped out a bundle of manifests held with rusted pins. One page slipped loose and landed open across the desk. A second tunnel route, harbor to private chapel, exit under Vittorio's townhouse. He meant to run. I tore out the sheet and turned just as a shot blew the office glass inward. Nico shoved me behind the metal desk and returned fire with an offended, almost theatrical ferocity. I asked for one manageable morning, he shouted. One. Outside, Lorenzo's voice cut through everything. Uncle, not yelled, spoken. I looked through the shattered pane. Vittorio stood at the end of the loading bay with one gun leveled at Lorenzo and the East River behind him like black steel. For the first time, the old man did not look benevolent. He looked tired. Almost disappointed. You could have ruled cleanly, Vittorio said. Instead, you brought conscience into business, and you brought children into it. Vittorio's gaze flicked to me through the office glass. She'll die tired too, trying to redeem men who enjoy being monsters. Lorenzo did not look back at me. That's the difference between us. No. Vittorio smiled without warmth. The difference is that she will make you believe you're better until the day you kill for her and discover you were always mine. Then he fired. Lorenzo moved first. He always did. The shots cracked so close together they sounded like one. Vittorio staggered, not dead. Lorenzo crossed the space between them before anyone else could breathe and hit him hard enough to drive him against the rusted rail. I will not dress what happened next in elegant language. It was not elegant. It was not clean. It was a nephew ending the oldest lie in his life with his own hands while men watched and did not intervene because some reckonings belong only to blood. Vittorio looked past Lorenzo once, toward the river, maybe toward the version of himself he had once preferred. Then Lorenzo ended it. Afterward he stood very still, chest rising once, twice, as if the world had become heavier in the instant it no longer held his uncle. Bianca came in with the records box. Tio sank against a crate because the last of his willpower had finally met its match. Nico lowered his weapon and said hoarsely, I want bread. I want a priest. I want 8 hours of sleep. I walked to Lorenzo across broken glass and tied smell and the wreckage of what he had had to become. He looked at me like a man waiting for judgment. Instead, I put the tunnel sheet in his hand and touched the side of his face with my good palm. It did not absolve him. That was why it mattered. By noon, the dead were counted. The living were stitched. The last of Vittorio's loyalists had either fled or bent the knee to a quieter order. Carlo's body was found in the Santa Marta nave beside 2 of Vittorio's men. Tio insisted on going to identify him himself because, as he told me with bloodless bluntness, someone should know he came back at the end, at sunset. Lorenzo stood in the chapel yard where Carlo died and said nothing for so long I thought he might remain there forever. Finally he turned to me, and with the exhaustion of a man who had survived the exact thing he feared would make him unrecognizable, said only, It is over. Peace did not arrive all at once. It came like a cautious animal, through paperwork, through funerals, through the absence of gunfire in the middle of the night so startling I woke from it more than once. It came in men lowering their voices for different reasons, in Teresa no longer keeping an overnight bag by the front door, in Bianca moving her things out of Lorenzo's main house and into an apartment she chose herself, then returning every Sunday for dinner anyway because chosen family, once named, behaves like blood and better. It came in Tio healing badly and pretending not to. In Nico gaining back 3 pounds, the weak Teresa stopped pretending she wasn't cooking for him specifically. In the restoration of Santa Marta's surviving records, which Loren funded publicly through a foundation, and privately threw the sort of money that never needed to introduce itself. It came in me too, though I distrust sentences like that because they sound tidier than healing feels from the inside. 3 weeks after the harbor, I was in the Gramercy kitchen making almond cake from Teresa's recipe and my own bad nerves. The batter had gone slightly grainy because I had overmixed it. While thinking about Carlo, on the counter beside it cooled a tray of burnt sugar oranges I had sliced too thin. Bitter, sweet, beautiful if no one looked too hard. Teresa eyed the arrangement. "What's this called?" I looked at the cake, the fragile sugar lacquer over fruit that would collapse if touched carelessly, and shrugged. "Still here." She made a small sound in her throat that might have been approval. "Good name." Nico wandered in, sniffing the air like a man crossing a holy threshold. "If that's for the Sunday table, I need everyone to know I have suffered enough to deserve the first slice." "You suffered from what?" Teresa asked. "Emotional famine. You had biscotti an hour ago. Those were medicinal." I laughed. Teresa hid a smile by reaching for more flour. Nico lowered his voice as he passed me. "He looks less dead when you're in the room." My hand stopped over the orange peel. "That's a strange compliment. It's the highest one I have." When Lorenzo came in later, he paused just inside the kitchen, as if he had crossed into a chapel he had not expected to find in his own house. He had lost some weight during the war, not enough for others to see, enough for me. His shirt sleeves were rolled. The ring clicked once against the back of a chair as he pulled it out and sat. The sound no longer warned me. Now it meant he was home. "What is that?" he asked, looking at the cake. "Still here." His gaze moved from the sugar shell to my face. He understood too quickly, as always. "For Carlo." "And me," I admitted, "and probably anyone who survives anything ugly and doesn't come back shaped correctly." He nodded once. "Then it's honest." We ate in the kitchen that night instead of the dining room because no one had the appetite for ceremony. Bianca told a story about a senator's son mistaking her patience for ignorance and losing both his wallet and his dignity in under 6 minutes. Tia almost smiled. Nico declared the cake emotionally devastating in a positive direction. And then, because near death had apparently improved his courage, asked Teresa whether she would ever go to dinner with him in a place that did not involve tactical exits. Teresa wiped her hands on a dish towel. "If you complain about the bread basket, I'll leave you there." Nico went utterly still. "So, yes, eat your cake." I had to look away to hide my grin. Later, when the others had drifted into the sitting room and the dishwasher hummed like distant weather, Lorenzo and I stood alone by the sink. City light pressed softly through the rear windows. The house felt almost ordinary. That was still the strangest luxury I had ever known. He touched the band of my ring finger, bare except for flour dust. "I went to the jeweler today," he said. I looked up. It annoyed me. "That sounds romantic." "I hated every tray he showed me," I laughed softly. "Why? Because they looked like objects for strangers." The kitchen went very quiet. He reached into his pocket and placed a small velvet box on the counter between us, like he was setting down evidence rather than fate. He did not open it right away. "If I ask this badly," he said, eyes on the box and not me, "it's because I've never wanted something ordinary this much." My throat tightened. He lifted the lid. Inside was a ring too simple for his world and exactly right for mine. Old-cut diamond, narrow gold band, antique workmanship. The sort of piece that looked like it had survived wars and chosen not to mention them. "I can give you houses," he said. "Protection, the ugliest legal teams in 3 states. But I know that isn't what you'd be saying yes to." He finally looked at me then, and the nakedness in his face made my knees weak. "You'd be saying yes to this life as it truly is. To me as I truly am. I won't ask you to pretend it's cleaner than it is." I could not answer immediately, not because I doubted him. Because he had placed the truth between us so carefully. that anything careless from me would have felt like sacrilege. When I left for the station, I said at last, I thought choosing you meant choosing darkness. I stepped closer. It wasn't that. It was choosing the man who walks into it and still knows the difference. His hand came to my jaw, warm, unsteady. Little saint, he said, and for the first time there was no possession in it at all. Only wonder, only home. Yes, I whispered. He put the ring on my finger, with the concentration of a man disarming grief. Then he kissed me in the kitchen light while the dishwasher hummed and someone in the next room, probably Nico, laughed too loudly at something Bianca said. When he finally rested his forehead against mine, the world felt almost shockingly small and human. I had never trusted quiet before. That night I did. 9 months later, the first thing I heard was the ring. Click, not sharp now, not warning. Just the familiar dry tap of Lorenzo's signet ring against the rim of his espresso cup, as he stood at the kitchen island, pretending to read contracts, while actually watching me knead bread dough. Autumn light slanted through the windows. Teresa had finally taken 2 days off with Nico to visit his mother in Jersey, which meant the house was quieter than it had any right to be. Bianca had a key and an opinion, so peace remained relative. The marble under my bare feet held the night's last coolness. Flour dusted my wrists. Across the room, the old Santa Marta records I had spent the summer restoring sat stacked in archival boxes. Ready to return to the rebuilt chapel library Lorenzo had funded in my mother's name and Chiara's. Ordinary life had turned out to be the most radical thing either of us had ever attempted. You're overworking the dough, Lorenzo said. I glanced at him. That is bold from a man whose only contribution to bread is eating it. My contribution is financial infrastructure. Heroic. He took the insult with dignity. This was one of the reasons I married him. The second knock at the front door came too fast to be casual. Lorenzo looked up first. So did I. The house security would have announced anyone expected. This was not expected. He set the cup down. The ring clicked once more. Every old memory woke in my body at the sound of hurried knocking against wood. Threshold, blood, Bianca in silk, he's mine. Without thinking, I wiped my hands on my apron and moved. Elena, Lorenzo said, already crossing after me. I opened the front door to a girl of maybe 17 in a cafe uniform, pale with shock, one hand pressed over a cut at her hairline. Behind her, a delivery scooter lay on its side against the curb. A black SUV idled at the far corner with 2 dark windows and exactly the wrong stillness. The girl swayed. I'm sorry, she said automatically. I think I hit your gate. Everything inside me went quiet and bright. Lock the door, I told Lorenzo. He did. The bolt slid home with that same heavy finality I remembered from another life. I took the girl by the shoulders and brought her inside as Lorenzo moved past us toward the side window to assess the street. The girl looked down, saw the blood already spotting the marble, and made a soft, horrified sound. I'm sorry about your floor. I closed my eyes for one helpless, aching second. There it was. The bookend, the proof, not of fate, of character. Some people survive horror by becoming harder, some by becoming unreadable. And some, against all evidence and reason, keep making room for other people's fear before their own. When I looked up, Lorenzo was watching me instead of the street. His face had gone still in that old way, but it was not danger now. It was memory landing with both hands. Kitchen, he said into the phone already at his ear. Now. And send 2 cars around the block. The girl blinked between us, dazed. Do you know each other? No, I said gently, guiding her toward the rear hall. But I know concussion, and I know when men sit too long in parked cars. By the time Bianca arrived 10 minutes later with enough outrage to power a small city, the girl was bandaged, crying, and drinking sweet tea at my table. The SUV had disappeared before Lorenzo's men reached it. Not a direct threat, Tio concluded later. A test. A reminder. His world did not become safe just because we had built warmth inside it. I knew that already. That evening, after the doctors cleared the girl and Teresa returned early to scold everyone as if absence itself were a moral failure, the house settled back around us. Nico came in with a bakery box from Jersey and announced that his mother liked Teresa better than him, which he considered a betrayal but one he would allow. Teresa told him to stop being dramatic and took his hand when she thought no one was looking. After dinner, Lorenzo found me alone in the front hall wiping the last faint trace of blood from the marble where the girl had stood. "Leave it," he said softly. I looked back over my shoulder. "Teresa will kill me. She'll threaten to, there's a difference." I smiled and straightened. He came to stand behind me, close enough that the front of his shirt brushed my shoulder blades. In the long mirror opposite us, we looked almost alarmingly married. Not polished, not mythic, just known. "You did it again," he said. I knew exactly what he meant. "So did you." His hand came around me, not to restrain, not to claim, to rest, to fit. The ring on that hand tapped lightly against the marble console table beside us. Same sound, different life. "When you knocked on my door bleeding," he said, voice low near my hair, "I thought the worst thing about you was that you made me want something I couldn't keep." He paused. "I was wrong." I turned in his arms. "What was the worst thing?" His gaze moved over my face with the unbearable gentleness that still startled me, even now. "That you stayed exactly who you were. And every time you do, little saint, it costs me the right to be less." My throat tightened so fast I had to look at his shirt buttons for a second before I trusted myself with his eyes again. "That sounds exhausting," I whispered. "It is." His mouth brushed my temple. "I recommend it." I laughed softly, then leaned into him, and for a little while neither of us said anything at all. The house creaked around us. Somewhere in the kitchen Nico was probably negotiating dessert like an international treaty. The city moved beyond the windows. Danger still existed. History still existed. Grief did too. Carlo's name could still open a room inside me that never quite sat down, but Lorenzo's hand remained warm at my waist. And the ring clicked once against marble like a promise that had finally learned how to stay. If love asks you to walk into the dark with open eyes, does it matter whether the dark belongs to the man or to the world that made him? Would you have chosen Lorenzo and let the cost of loving him become your ordinary life?